Hi, I'm Ella Spencer, and today we're going to go to Japan. Um, and we have a speaker from Japan who's really an American named Gregory Kulaki, who is living in Japan. He works as a senior researcher or a senior scholar or something at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And joining us also is my friend Richard Denton, who is a retired physician, but he certainly keeps himself busy. He's the co-chair of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War in North America, as well as being a big-time Rotarian. So he knows a thing or two about nuclear weapons, and that is really the topic that we're going to cover today, because I really want to quiz Gregory Kulaki for about some of the things going on in Asia. Of course, we all know that the Biden administration is going to have obviously different policies from the one that preceded it. And I have seen signs or hints that the policy may be much friendlier toward nuclear disarmament, or certainly reducing nuclear weapons than anything that we've seen in decades, maybe. So let's get right down to it. Good morning, Gregory, and good morning, Richard Denton. Say hi, Gregory.
Greetings.
Greetings. All right. So we are going to mostly quiz you, because I understand very little really about Japanese military policy, but I believe that there is this imaginary umbrella that covers the half of the world, and that Japan is under it, and they think this thing is going to protect them. It's called the nuclear umbrella. Is that right?
Yeah, the concept of the nuclear umbrella has been around for a long time. There are actually about 60 or so references to it in the diplomatic history of the United States, the foreign relations of the United States. The very earliest references were actually to the supposed Soviet umbrella over China.
Oh.
References to Japan come later. And the references are very scattered. They cover all kinds of crazy things. For example, there's references to Asia from a discussion in Thailand about the Thai military being covered by the nuclear umbrella so that it would encourage it to suppress Laotian communist guerrillas. Right now, people think of it as this more formal policy, but actually it's just a very vague concept.
Oh, it's just a well, there must be documents. There's something called the Status of Forces Agreement, isn't there, between the U.S. and Japan, which has been there since about, what, 1960?
Correct.
But now is that the basis? It's like a pact of friendship or something, right? No, it's not the basis.
No, it's a very formal and controlling treaty that governs an awful lot of even Japanese domestic behavior. Flights at Haneda Airport here in Tokyo are rerouted because of provisions of that treaty. But the nuclear umbrella there's no formal guarantee from the United States to use nuclear weapons. It's informal. It's not part of the security treaty at all. And as a matter of fact, the provisions of the treaty that do mention nuclear weapons make it clear that they are not to be brought into Japan without prior consultation of the Japanese government.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And have they ever brought them in, and have they consulted?
Yes. Routinely and secretly for decades. This was uncovered finally. We all knew about it for years, but it was finally uncovered in 2009 when Foreign Minister Okada ordered the Foreign Ministry to disclose a lot of the information about covert cooperation with US nuclear weapons policies. And mainly it discussed the nuclear submarine launched cruise missiles that were on submarines that were visiting Japanese ports in violation of the treaty and in violation of actually Japanese domestic policy. which does not allow for the introduction or transit of US nuclear weapons in or through Japan.
Okay. Was there an uproar when this was disclosed, or did people sort of think that had been going on all along and they weren't surprised?
By 2009, there was no uproar. But back when this was being debated in the 70s, when they returned Okinawa to Japan, we occupied the island until 1972. The United States was forced to remove the 1,000 or so nuclear weapons that we had stored in Okinawa. And then again in the 90s, when President George H.W. Bush removed all US tactical nuclear weapons from Asia, there was another occasion where this issue was debated in Japan.
Now, all of that is, well, I'm not sure. Maybe I just wasn't looking, because I don't know anything about any of those removals. Richard, do you know anything about the history of the removal of tactical weapons from Asia?
No.
Okay, good. That makes two of us.
It was the boldest and largest disarmament initiative ever that the United States undertook, and it was unilateral. This was not part of a treaty with anyone. George H.W. Bush decided in 1991 by himself that it was dangerous to have all of these tactical nuclear weapons stationed abroad. And in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, he unilaterally ordered them to be removed. Many were removed from Europe. A few remain and remain to this day, but all of them were removed from East Asia.
That is really interesting. You know, at the time, all peaceniks hated George W. Bush, but this now leaves me with a little warmer feeling toward that man.
Well, this is his dad, right? H.W. Bush.
Oh,
the elder.
H.W. Bush. Okay, good.
91.
Okay, so yeah, he was a man with a better judgment in general, all around, I guess. But why don't we know about that? Because if Richard doesn't know, then it's pretty. It kind of lets me off the hook for my ignorance. But I really don't think I ever heard about that.
Well, the problem is we've retreated so much from the disarmament atmosphere of the 1990s. Over the last 20 years, we've been going ever more rapidly in the wrong direction, to the point now where the Obama administration actually agreed to Japanese requests to reintroduce US tactical or nuclear weapons into Asia. We've sold the Japanese dual capable aircraft that can carry US nuclear munitions. And we have an arrangement made through something called the Extended Deterrence Dialogue that the Obama administration started to reintroduce US tactical nuclear weapons in a time of crisis, whatever that is. And then the Trump administration piled on top of that the development of a new submarine-launched nuclear-capable cruise missile that Congress is currently funding and is under development, that would put the nuclear weapons back on the attack submarines that would be visiting Japanese ports.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So one of the reasons we've forgotten about taking them out is that we're so busy trying to put them back in.
Mm-hmm. Now I hear that there's kind of a new discussion going on about what Biden might do and why the Japanese are nervous about it, or at least opposed to any kind of backtracking and reduction of nuclear. I think Biden or people in Washington have been not using the word no first use lately, but I was told it's something like sole purpose.
Correct.
The sole purpose of nuclear weapons is deterrence. And that is, I don't know whether that's a firm policy or what, but it means basically the same thing as no first use. Am I right? please.
Nope, you got it right.
Okay. Um, who's talking that way, and how much should we trust that that is a realistic possibility? And
So
what
the Obama administration talked about that in 2009.
Mhm.
And they were about to make that US policy, but the Japanese objected, and the US administration gave in to the Japanese. Now, it's very careful that we talk about who we're talking about when we say the Japanese. What we're talking about is a tiny number of officials who don't want their names revealed and who say these things in secret, who are not elected officials, but are just bureaucrats in the foreign ministry, in the North American Bureau. And they're the ones who supposedly, according to US officials, make these demands on the US. But they deny them in public here in Japan. One of the reasons I'm here is because we're investigating all of this and trying to make it public and trying to make it better known in Japan, what their officials are doing in secret. So the Obama administration didn't do it. He had another chance when he went to Hiroshima, where he wanted to make this announcement, but the Japanese foreign ministry intervened again to stop him from changing the status quo. So the Biden administration now is also considering trying again to say to the world that we won't use nuclear weapons for any other purpose than deterring a nuclear attack or, responding, God forbid, to a nuclear attack from someone else. And already the Japanese government is lobbying the Biden administration, as it lobbied the Obama administration, not to do that.
Okay, well, let us joyfully participate hand in hand in exposing these nefarious fellows. Because now, are they people in the ministry? What are their roles, and why? I can imagine why they don't want it known, because the Japanese anti-nuclear weapons movement is clearly the strongest in the world. And I wonder if you check public opinion, if the polls must do so, I presume, what would you find out about what the Japanese want and believe in?
Well, polling on the Treaty on the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons, for example, which is the major issue here now in Japan, Japanese participation in that treaty, is in the high 70s in favor. If Japan were to participate in the treaty, then it would have to not allow the introduction of US nuclear weapons into its territory or the use of US nuclear weapons in the defense of Japan in any form. That gives an indication of what the Japanese public thinks about it. But there are these groups of officials. They're in what's called the North American Bureau of the Foreign Ministry, and they are people who are involved in the discussion and application of the security treaty you mentioned. So it's a very small number of people, but they have an enormous influence over their American counterparts, or their American counterparts are trying to exaggerate their influence in order to get what they want out of the US system. And because there's so much secrecy involved, it's really hard to see who's pushing who or whether they're working together.
Well, I know that when Obama did all the things that disappointed most of us, such as going for this modernization program, nuclear weapons, there were a lot of excuses put forward by people who wanted to like him. I want to like him, but I think there are real problems there. And that, that he had to do it, that this was the best deal he could make to get the New START treaty approved by the Senate. And therefore, we have to just smile and accept it. His heart is with us. And some of the people who were involved with his administration, I remember talking with Joseph Cironcione who was convinced that he and his team, that Obama and his team really did want a much greater move toward nuclear disarmament that when they came in, but just weren't able to pull it off. And I wonder what that means. Maybe your job is to go around and find out who's pulling levers that make it impossible. Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, we do research, and I do a lot of it related to Asia, Japan, and China. We also do research on the technical aspects of weapons, like whether, how missile defense works, whether it works. We just did a report on hypersonic weapons. This whole, can we just get rid of the ICBMs altogether? Or if you insist on keeping them, can we just fix the old ones instead of buying new ones? We do a lot of research about cost and benefits of those things. But we also try to find out what's going on at a policy level, and we try to lobby both Congress and the administration on our preferences, which of course would be, to move more quickly towards disarmament. The bureaucracy just has so much power that elected officials, are afraid to challenge it. Maybe Biden, who's an older and more experienced individual, will have more courage than Obama had to call into question all of this accepted wisdom from the bureaucrats in the Pentagon and the State Department and do what he wants. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm hoping. And we're trying to supply him the evidence that says, don't worry about Japan. If you make these changes to US nuclear weapons policies, these bureaucrats who are making all the noise will just hide in their corners and be angry. But Japan's not going to develop its own nuclear weapons or become a threat to the United States. You don't have to worry about that.
Do you think any of them are taking it seriously and worrying about it, that Japan might go develop?
Well, that's the problem. That's the reason Obama wouldn't do it, because these US officials say, well, if you don't do this, the Japanese will develop their own nuclear weapons, which is, of course, ridiculous. These bureaucrats hide from their own people. Mm-hmm. If they came out and advocated greater use of US nuclear weapons, not to mention Japanese nuclear weapons, they'd lose their jobs. They'd never say these things in public. So you really don't need to worry about what they think.
Well, we here in Canada have some experience with double-faced, two-faced governments, that want to claim to be very much peaceable forces, but really don't do things like sign the TPNW. And so I guess that's something we all have to look for. I guess I blamed it all not on necessarily Obama or any even two-faced politicians, but mostly on the jobs and the economy and the politicians. I mean, they've got, as I understand in the US, they've got every state deliberately contaminated with, building, having some installations or job programs in every state, so that there would be a demand for continuation of the current development of weaponry. Well, that's there must be real political forces behind it. In terms of Japan, who would be the political forces supporting? Well, I would be reductionist and say Abe. I assume that it's really Abe that is in favor of maintaining, this kind of relationship with the U.S. on nuclear matters, and that he's put people there who agree with him. I presume he'd get rid of them if he didn't like it, wouldn't he?
Well, it doesn't really work that way over here. I'm not an expert on Japanese politics. I'm learning a little bit, but these are career civil servants. So they're not the cabinet officers who are appointed by elected officials. They're people that have been in these bureaucracies their entire lives. And these bureaucracies have so much power because the elected politicians come and go. And they have to learn everything about what's going on. And by the time they do, the next group is coming in. But these bureaucrats who've been there forever, they are the ones that everybody accepts as knowing what's going on. And so they get what they want. So the most powerful person in Japan in this regard right now is the vice foreign minister. His name is Takeo Akiba. And he's the one who's organized this group of Japanese bureaucrats, sort of pro-nuclear Japanese bureaucrats, this clique really, it's not a group. It's really a small number of people. And he's probably the strongest, silent, unknown to almost everybody except a few of us who follow these things, bureaucrat who's been pushing this so hard with the United States.
Okay, where are you going with this? How, I don't want to ask your method.
We can ignore these people. We can ignore them. We can safely ignore them and do what we want. So if Biden wants to declare sole purpose, he does not have to worry about the opinions of these people. He can tell them no safely without worrying that there's going to be a nuclear armed Japan as a result.
Well, okay, now look beyond Japan, and you say that informed me that H.W. Bush had removed tactical weapons throughout Asia. That must have an impact on other countries then, besides Japan. And are there conversations going on in other countries in Asia that are comparable to the one that you're investigating in Japan?
Well, the central issue in Asia is China. And the central military problem for the United States and its allies in Asia is the increase in conventional capabilities that China now has, which are much greater than they were in 1991. Personally, I think those things are somewhat exaggerated. For example, we talk about a Chinese military buildup, but China has spent a constant 2% of GDP on its military since 1988 as a matter of policy. But because its economy has grown, that 2% has grown. And of course, its technology is more modernized. And so China has a much stronger conventional military than it had in 1991. So strong, in fact, that it is now, that the US advantage is much less clear in a lot of areas. And so this is what makes people in the United States and some people in Japan want tactical nuclear weapons reintroduced to sort of counterbalance this growing Chinese conventional capability. And so it's sort of like the situation we had in Europe in the early days of the Cold War, where you had a preponderant conventional Soviet military, and the United States and NATO allies felt they had to use tactical nuclear weapons to balance that. We're seeing that same dynamic emerge here in Asia now because of China's increasingly capable conventional military capabilities.
So, well, I kind of think that I was aware that there are tactical weapons still in Europe, and I thought the big campaign should be to try to get them out of Europe. I don't hear much about tactical weapons elsewhere. Where else are there tactical weapons owned by the US, or what would be NATO, I guess, in other parts of the world besides Europe? Is that the only place?
That's it. That's it. But they want to bring them back into Asia, and the people who want to do this have been pushing very, very hard for it for almost 15 years now.
Richard,
under Trump, they actually got them to commit to building a new weapon system.
Richard, what I would like for you to put your oar in here, because I am not. I know that IPPNW has been a major force behind ICAN, the outfit that created and initiated the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. But what position do you know about in IPPNW regarding any of these changes in the position of the U.S. in Asia? Do you know anything about this? And feel free to ask Greg whatever you want to ask.
Well, I mean, we certainly support getting rid of nuclear weapons. We want to get them out of NATO. We feel that they don't serve deterrence, both because if you have them for them to be a deterrent, you have to use them, and you don't want to use them because of the humanitarian consequences of them. And now we know also about the electromagnetic radiation and how that could mess up electricity in the country, as well as the nuclear winter. In terms of China, and again, I guess with the tactical weapons, our concern is that because they are smaller, low yield, they're more likely to be used. And then, of course, once you start using them, then up goes the escalation. Mm-hmm. Those are our concerns, and therefore we definitely would not want them. I guess the question I would have to you, Gregory, is, again, the risk of accident. I think both the US and China don't want to go to war. On the other hand, China wants Taiwan as part of their territory. They've basically taken over the Western province with the Uyghurs. They've taken over Tibet. And Xiaoping there certainly wants to add Taiwan to his collection. But unless Taiwan makes a major mistake, I don't see them doing an invasion. But with all the building up of the islands in the South China Sea, even on the Philippines continental shelf, I gather, and you have all the American ships sailing around in maneuvers, what is the risk of accident? What is the risk of then things escalating and becoming very unpredictable?
Yeah, that's a very serious problem. The more military hardware you park and fly around and exercise and train with, the greater the chances that there's going to be some sort of accident, like, for example, when those two airplanes hit each other back in the early 2000s during the George Bush administration, and the pilots had to land a plane containing very sensitive US electronic intelligence equipment on a Chinese island. Of course, the Chinese took the plane apart and learned everything they could about how it works as a result of that accident. But the Chinese pilot lost his life. His plane went down and he was killed. If something like that were to happen today in the highly charged atmosphere we have now, which is much worse than it was in the early 2000s, it's difficult to predict what would happen. War, very rarely are wars started with some sort of intent, right? I mean, they just start and spiral out of control. With the weaponry that's used now, with all these long-range radars and very quick semi-automated decision-making processes, escalation could happen very, very rapidly. US war plans call for, knocking out Chinese anti-satellite launchers deep within Chinese territory with conventional munitions very early in the start of a conflict, in order to avoid having the United States being, blinded or made deaf if the Chinese decided to disable or attack US satellites, which we use to, govern our forces on the ground. So the pace of a war would be so fast that having that nuclear element sitting there in the middle of it with plans to use it could be just catastrophic. The people in the United States, the war planners assume, oh, the Chinese will never respond with nuclear weapons. We can use them first and get away with it. And they assume that because China keeps its nuclear weapons generally off alert. It has a no first use policy. It's only conducted, maybe 10% of the amount of nuclear tests that the United States do. Its weapons are cruder, its warheads are larger. And so it wouldn't risk escalation. So the United States thinks they can get away with using tactical weapons. But that's a very risky assumption to take.
Are the people in Japan, or
you're exactly right,
the Japanese government, really afraid of China? I mean,
yes,
they really are.
Yes.
Okay.
I think one of the things that people in Japan see, they know what they went through in the 1930s. And when they look at the pace of Chinese social and cultural and modernization and the development of nationalist attitudes in China, they're looking back and seeing themselves in the 1930s. I don't think that's a correct judgment, but I think that's what people imagine here in Japan, ordinary people. So the fear of China in Japan is real. It's not imaginary. On the other hand, I think it can be managed through skillful diplomacy, and that's really what we need. We need politicians, instead of ramping up the fear factor, to be calming everybody down and building bridges and saying, look, we have these disagreements, but we can manage them. And nobody can do that better than an outside party like the United States that can help the two sides. And this is what we were doing, in the sort of the 80s and the 90s, and even in the early 2000s, but we've gotten away from that. And I think we really need to get back to conducting diplomacy instead of military posturing.
Great. Well, that's really what makes me wonder, what kind of steps, procedures can you foresee going through to move us in that direction?
Well, the first thing is we have to get rid of this notion of that there's some sort of grand historical contest going on here, like that China is rising and we're falling and there's going to be some winner of some titanic battle. This is going back to the same kind of ideological nonsense we had at the early days of the Cold War. We need to get rid of that idea. China is still a poor country. 600 million people, 600 million of China's 1.4 billion earn less than 1,000 renminbi, or about $200, less than $200 a month. So the idea that China's some, monster about to pounce on the world with all this tremendous economic prowess is really quite nonsensical. China has enormous internal economic development problems, which lead to the sort of problems they're having in Xinjiang and Tibet, and the fact that they have to repress their own citizenry and control information. They do that because of the tremendous pressures they think are bubbling up at the bottom, that they feel like they have to use these very oppressive and undemocratic means to control. So it's not this, challenger to the United States and the international system that's so often depicted as these days.
No, but if the Japanese people are afraid, then I wonder whether any good Japanese politician could be the skilled diplomat that you're looking for in reducing tensions with China. I mean, I frankly think Xi is not a very nice guy. And he really is, he's really doing some bad things.
Well, so he's no different than his predecessors.
No different. Oh.
No, the Chinese Communist Party is remarkably consistent.
Really?
It's a system. It's not the individuals, it's the ideology and the system. They believe in these, that it's necessary to exercise this kind of control they have. And what Xi Jinping has done is he's just done it better than his two predecessors.
Really?
He's been able to marshal more support within the upper echelons of the party around his efforts to sort of clean up corruption, which he's done. But he's also, starting to exercise more control over areas of life that were starting to liberalize under the other two because they felt they didn't need to manage them quite as rigidly as she does. So it's a difference of degree, but I don't think it really is a question of personality.
No. Okay, because I was just thinking.
It's just my personal opinion. I mean, it's hard to know.
You're an expert on China, so I will take your opinion as worth a lot, especially since I haven't heard anybody else say for a while that she is just like all the others. I guess I thought he's really a turn toward the worse, and that it would be really hard to negotiate with him in the way that we'd like to think it's possible to negotiate, try to find areas of common interest and common ground. And I mean, I'm concerned about the Uyghurs, for example. How, I can't separate that out from all the other basket of issues that we have to deal with. And certainly, it's a problem. Let's say you are the ambassador to China and you've got a whole basket full of goodies that you can offer as a deal. What would your
well, it's not a question of a basket of goodies, right?
Pardon? Sorry.
It's not really a question of a basket of goodies. There's really nothing that the United States can offer. It wouldn't be buying them off. It's a difference in philosophy, governing philosophy. You can call it ideology if you want, but I mean, what the Chinese Communist Party wants to be able to do is govern their own country as they see fit. Mm-hmm. As Americans and people all over the world find many of the measures they take to do that repressive and contrary to general basic principles of human rights. Mm-hmm. So we have to find a way to have a meaningful discussion about that. Putting that in the context of some great power competition just makes the Chinese leadership feel like, well, you're bringing these things up because you're just using this as a stick to beat us with. You don't care what the Indians are doing to their Muslims, which is just as bad. You don't care what the Saudis are doing to their citizens, which is just as bad. You're just using this human rights thing to, score political points. So they can't see that this actually means something to Americans, that this tells us something about you that makes it hard to get along with you. If we can have these conversations more honestly outside the context of some great competition between the two countries, then I think the Chinese leadership would be much more willing to listen to what we have to say on human rights.
Okay, I will tell Biden that he should appoint you the ambassador to China. And
I think he's appointing that guy from Disney, right? I
don't know.
Eisner? No, I think he skipped that. He's going to appoint Rahm Emanuel now, I think.
No kidding.
That's what I read in the paper today.
Rahm Emanuel is the least diplomatic person in the world. I have heard things about Rahm Emanuel.
Well, I guess he's looking for a tough guy, right?
Oh, no. No, that would not be good. You will not be happy with that. Given your own predilections.
I don't think it'll work out well,
no.
But who knows?
Oh, is that really a decision? Because I hadn't heard that.
Well, I read it in the news. I don't know if it's final or not.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, I mean, there are nice things about Rahm Emanuel, but tact and suave style are not among them.
No, a diplomat he's not. Yes.
No, he's not. Okay, this has been fun. Richard, do you want to ask any questions before we wind this up?
Oh, it's
No?
been wonderful listening to you, Gregory. It's been very enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Well, it's very nice to have met you both and to have this conversation.
All right, now you can go back to bed. It's now 2:30 or 3 a.m. in Tokyo. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, I'm going to have lunch and you can go to bed. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
My pleasure.